Following Tuesday's huge developments in Alvin Kamara's ongoing legal case, you get some good news about Alvin Kamara personally, but what's next for the New Orleans Saints as they await NFL discipline? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, to all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, you are welcome always to subscribe and follow, always for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want to keep the conversation going one-on-one with me, get our exclusive film studies, Q&As, and inside information texted directly to your phone, head over today to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSaints. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and then some on Locked On Saints. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, it is Wednesday, so we got our midweek fundamentals, and we're going to get a little nerdy with the numbers. We're going to take a look at the distribution in the run game from 2022 and how the New Orleans Saints ended up producing, or where they struggled to produce in 2022, and how it could be impacted with the personnel changes in 2023. We're going to take a look at whether or not the Saints are going to be able to produce with or without Alvin Kamara on the field if he does face a suspension. But first, big news, huge developments in the Alvin Kamara ongoing legal process. And what you need to know right off the bat here is that it's good news for Alvin Kamara and could potentially be great news for the New Orleans Saints as well. Here's how it all breaks down. New Orleans Saints running back Alvin Kamara was facing two different cases, effectively. He had a criminal case in Las Vegas that was attached to the Las Vegas altercation in February of 2022 with the nightclub incident, an alleged battery case, all these other things. And then there was also the civil case that was brought up here in New Orleans, which is effectively connected to that same case. You had a criminal case and a civil case. Both of those cases have now come to the end of their process. That July 31st date that we were all eyeballing is now completely null and void, doesn't matter, because they won't go to trial. This has all been handled out of court. So all told, Alvin Kamara's legal battle is done. It is finished. It is concluded. We have nothing but clarity from the legal end of it for now. So let me catch you up on what that means. Alvin Kamara, when it comes to the criminal case, which was the felony charge that he was facing, conspiracy to commit battery resulting in bodily harm, that was the case that he was facing in Las Vegas. That criminal case has dropped from a felony charge all the way down to a misdemeanor charge. I assume a misdemeanor assault charge, to which he pled no contest, and therefore it is done. It's finished. What he walks away with is 30 hours of community service that he has to complete within the next 90 days, meaning he gets it done in the 2 weeks before training camp, or he might miss some training camp days, or he's got to spend some time off getting it done. He also has to pay a fine of $500, as well as over $100,000 in medical expenses to the victim. The criminal case, on the other hand, the one that was here in New Orleans, or excuse me, the civil case, my apologies, that was the criminal case. The civil case, which is here in New Orleans, has been settled outside of court with confidential numbers or confidential situations. So we don't know anything about that, but we know that it's done, and that's fine. So what this means is that Alvin Kamara won't see jail time. What this means is that Alvin Kamara's life won't be massively impacted or severely impacted by this singular situation. What we don't know is how many games he's going to miss, because the NFL is going to look at this on their own. So now that's the next part of the process. Alvin Kamara evades jail time, stuff like that. I never expected he was going to see jail time or anything. That didn't seem like that was going to be in the cards anyway. So now he's completely escaped that. The legal process is completely done. Now the next big thing is how many games will he be suspended in 2023, if any at all? Because we have to leave open the possibility that the NFL does what they did with Ezekiel Elliott and takes an entire year to do an investigation before anything happens. So we might have to wait and see how this goes. But the reason why the felony dropping to a misdemeanor is important is because according to the NFL's code of conduct policy, felony charges resulting or as a that are inclusive of like violence, family violence, domestic violence, and much, much more, assault, things like that. Those will be met in a first offender basis of a minimum 6-game suspension, a minimum 6 games. Now that that is no longer a felony charge and he evades the felony charge and then takes the misdemeanor charge instead, it does mean that he is still subject to discipline by the NFL, Ezekiel Elliott, as well as others that have kind of had that situation go down. There have been, or there will be, very likely a suspension, but he effectively goes from having a 6-game floor to maybe a 6-game ceiling. So what I would say now is what I've been saying before, is that I would expect a suspension between 6 and 11 games, right? 6 games because that's the minimum of the code of conduct policy. 11 games because that's what Deshaun Watson got. So you're looking at something in between there. And I think that Alvin Kamara, Deshaun Watson's case is kind of hard to figure out, like, how the NFL is going to handle both of those things. They nearly bungled the Deshaun Watson case anyway, so who knows? So when it comes to where Alvin Kamara is now evading the felony charge, it could mean that his range is anywhere between 2 to 8 games, right? It could still be 6 or more. That could still happen, but it could also now very conceivably come in at fewer games. I think there's also the chance that what you see is something similar to, if I recall correctly, Ben Roethlisberger, when he was suspended for 6 games, they did an appeal and then like an evaluation of some sort, and then they reduced it to 4 games. Bud Dupree pled guilty to an assault charge in 2022 and was not suspended in 2022 at all. So we'll have to see exactly how all this goes. But what we have to admit here is that things will be a little bit different from Alvin Kamara. There's video that the NFL is going to look at in their investigation. It happened during an NFL sanctioned event. He was in Las Vegas because he was in the Pro Bowl, and he was even arrested following the Pro Bowl, again, following an NFL sanctioned event. So the optics of it could potentially play a role into how the NFL looks at this. What we know is that there is no such thing as consistency when it comes to the NFL and when it comes to legal practices. No one knows how long this is going to take. Could be days, could be weeks, could be an entire calendar year of an investigation again. No one knows how long the suspension is going to be because the NFL has never known what it's doing in these situations. And of course, we never know exactly how the appeals process is going to impact it as well. So what we have to know is that this is entirely a moving target. The NFL will eventually, at an unknown time, say, Alvin Kamara, you are suspended for this many games. Alvin Kamara and his camp will then turn around and say, we want to appeal that, trying to petition for lesser games. And in the NFL, will choose whether or not to reduce the punishment, the discipline, or maintain the punishment or discipline. Will that happen in 2023? Will that happen in 2024? We don't know. I think it's likely that it happens in 2023. So if I had to give you my most likely scenario, I would say that it is a 2 to 6 game suspension, although knowing it could creep up beyond that because you never know with the NFL. They have no idea what they're doing most of the time. And so when you look at it, I think there's a potential here that it's a 2 to 6 game suspension at the beginning of the 2023 NFL season. So what will the New Orleans Saints do in that case? Who are their opponents and where will they turn to get the run game going? That's what we're going to take a look at next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each and every week all season long. So whether you're prepping for the draft or you're scouting the waiver wire, every single week, we're going to be giving you the players that are going to be a guaranteed fit in your roster. So with draft prep underway this upcoming season, let's see who Vinny picked as this week's eBay's guaranteed fit fantasy pick of the week. When you're on the clock for your first overall pick in the 2023 fantasy draft, 49ers running back Christian McCaffrey is a guaranteed fit. A healthy McCaffrey is guaranteed to see more than 300 touches in his first full season with the San Francisco 49ers. And McCaffrey, of course, checks all the boxes, whether it's because of the fact that he's incredibly talented or his usage, high floor, but also high ceiling. Run with CMC is a guaranteed fit at number 1 for a smooth ride to big fantasy numbers. Vinny Iyer over at Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship. And eBay knows that a championship team is all about players being the perfect fit. And the same goes with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories at your fingertip for your vehicle, you can make sure that your ride stays running smoothly. Everything from air filters to brakes, batteries, taillights, alternators, shock struts, you name it, eBay Motors has it. And they'll make sure that everything is the right fit for your car, because eBay's guaranteed fit helps you understand exactly what you need for your vehicle the very first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your car needs just a few little fixing up here and there, because now you'll always have the setup for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything that your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check mark. Get the right parts, the right fit, all at the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is available only to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again to all the everydayers out there making us your first listen of the day every day. We're going to take a look at more and more Alvin Kamara running back room stuff going into tomorrow's episode for Thursday, as we are going to be taking a look at position battles. So who will be the guys behind the big three, or the potential guy behind the big three at Alvin Kamara, Jamaal Williams, and Kendre Miller that could potentially have an impact if Alvin Kamara misses games. We're going to get to that tomorrow, but today we're going to focus on Jamaal Williams and Kendre Miller, because here's the bottom line. If Alvin Kamara misses time in 2023, the New Orleans Saints should not have a problem moving the ball. And if they do, it's on them. They spent time this offseason and invested heavily in their running back room, bringing in last year's rushing touchdowns leader in Jamaal Williams, and then going out there and drafting in the third round an incredibly talented, very young running back in Kendre Miller out of TCU, who himself rushed for 17 touchdowns last year, as well as 1,399 yards with the national champion runner-up TCU Horned Frogs. Now, can he translate the success of the collegiate game into the run game, into the NFL game? The New Orleans Saints have been very confident about that. When I spoke to Joel Thomas, the New Orleans Saints running back coach during OTAs, one of the things that he told me was that they're very confident in Kendre Miller. They like the way that he moves. They like his vision. They like his ability to get north and south very quickly. They like his breakaway speed, and they believe that he can be an impact in the passing game. So there is no doubt in my mind that the New Orleans Saints should be able to continue to move the ball, even without Alvin Kamara in the lineup for 2, 4, 6, 8 games in 2023, whatever it ends up being based upon whatever the NFL does. The thing that I like about what the New Orleans Saints did this offseason is when they revamped their running back room, they prepared for 3 different situations. 3 different situations. It looked like I was holding up 2 fingers. 3 different situations. Boop. The first of which is, can you produce as a complementary piece, complementary, complementary piece, not giving compliments, but being complimentary, to Alvin Kamara? Can you bolster the focus of Alvin Kamara as an offensive weapon by lessening the focus of Alvin Kamara as a between the tackles bell cow runner? That's one of the ways that Jamaal Williams makes the New Orleans Saints offense better, because he is a better bell cow back between the tackles, but also frees up Alvin Kamara to be able to do all the things out in space that you should be doing with Alvin Kamara. Kendre Miller helps there too. Kendre Miller brings positional versatility to what he can do at running back. His ability to run between the tackles, get around the edge, catch passes, operate in the screen game, his north and south ability, his breakaway speed. Kendre Miller hasn't run a 40, so we don't know what his 40 time is, but he's probably the fastest running back out of the 3 with Alvin Kamara and Jamaal Williams as a part of that conversation. So I think that the Saints have enough versatility between those 2 players, and we'll take a look at some of the other guys that could potentially get mixed in larger pass catching roles and stuff like that in tomorrow's episode. But I think that the guys that are in the building right now in Jamaal Williams and Kendre Miller have all of the talent that the New Orleans Saints need to be able to, assuming they stay healthy, to be able to make up for the absence of Alvin Kamara. So that's the second piece, right? So they're the complementary pieces that can alleviate Alvin Kamara of the bell cow between the running back spots, but they also have the talent to be able to work in lieu of Alvin Kamara, because the 2, Kendre Miller and Jamaal Williams, especially if Kendre Miller evolves into the pass catcher that the New Orleans Saints believe that he can, then all of a sudden the 2 of them can complement one another and produce in place of Alvin Kamara. One of the things that Joel Thomas told me is that when Mark Ingram showed up in New Orleans, he was not a guy that was considered a high volume pass catcher. When Latavius Murray showed up in New Orleans, again, not a guy that had a large pass catching background. And what did they do? They turned them into pass catchers here in New Orleans. They expect to be able to do the same thing with the 20-year-old Kendre Miller, 21 by the time that the season begins. So let's say that the New Orleans Saints are without Alvin Kamara for, let's say the original suspension is 6 games, okay? And then Alvin Kamara and his team appeal, and that gets reduced to 4 games. Let's just say that happens. Here are the teams that the New Orleans Saints would not have Alvin Kamara against: the Tennessee Titans, the Carolina Panthers, the Green Bay Packers, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The only team in that group, when it comes to run defense or the ability or athleticism at the second level with the ability to be able to guard running backs in the passing game out of the backfield, that concerns me is Tampa. I know they lost Tom Brady on the offensive side, but guys like Vita Vea, guys like Devontae David, guys like Devin White, who are still on the team, those guys have been successful against the New Orleans Saints running game before. So even with Tom Brady not there on the offensive side, the defense can still be in a situation to where they could potentially pester the New Orleans Saints when it comes to Jamaal Williams and Kendre Miller and getting them involved in the passing game. The place that Tom Brady, or not having Tom Brady, well, okay, some of it is that you don't have Tom Brady. The other part of it is the other truth, which is that you're stuck with Baker Mayfield, right? Like that's the other piece of it, is that the offense probably isn't going to be on the field very long. So eventually the defense can get worn down, and then that works to your advantage. Young quarterback, potentially in Tennessee, either Malik Willis or Will Levis. We'll see what happens there. Maybe it's Ryan Tannehill. Wouldn't be worried about that either. Young quarterback in Carolina or Andy Dalton. You'll take either one of those odds. Young quarterback, well, inexperienced NFL quarterback in Jordan Love. I think he's seen a lot. He just hasn't gotten the opportunity to perform a lot. And you're catching him early in the season in his first year as a full-time starter, all those other things. So there's a chance that those offenses stay off the field a bunch, and therefore the defense gets worn down, which will benefit you in the passing game. Or excuse me, the run game. My apologies. If that extends to week 5, week 6, that's the New England Patriots. Get a little bit concerned there because that's Bill Belichick, right? Bill Belichick runs that defense. So you're not going up against the players, you're going up against Bill Belichick. So that makes sense. And then Houston, you're pretty comfortable with that. So really, like the Saints, man, even if this was going to be the minimum 6-game suspension, you got pretty good matchups in terms of what you can do. And a guy like Jamaal Williams has experience running against the Green Bay Packers defense because he's done it 4 times in the last 2 years. So I think that there is something there to where the Saints are pretty comfortable, or should be pretty comfortable, looking at their schedule and going, okay, these are defenses we feel we can match up with, even if Alvin Kamara isn't in the lineup. And then for whatever reason, if Alvin Kamara is in the lineup because the suspension doesn't happen or it's taking longer or something like that, then you get a little bit more concerned because there's some of those tougher games towards the end. The Saints' last AFC opponent is the Indianapolis Colts on October 29th. Everything after that is NFC opponents: Bears, Vikings, and then your division games along with the Lions, the Giants, and the Rams. Those games really, really matter down the stretch, but you have all those early AFC games. You have a couple of those within the first couple of weeks. Of course, Tennessee, New England, Houston, Jacksonville, who we've kind of discussed. Indianapolis is early as well. So those AFC games don't really impact your tiebreaker stuff within your conference. So those are situations where maybe early in the season, if you drop one of those because you can't get your run game going or something like that, you're fine. But we should also remember that the New Orleans, or you're in a better position than losing an NFC situation. But we should also remember that this New Orleans Saints offense has completely rebuilt its pass catchers at wide receiver and tight end. So if the guys want to move the ball with Derek Carr, they have no excuse but to be able to move the ball with Derek Carr. So one way or another, this is shaping up to be favorable. Not great, not perfect, not good, not ideal, but favorable for the New Orleans Saints, even if they're without Alvin Kamara within the first 4 to 6 games of the season, matchup-wise, talent-wise, complementary-wise, and what you can do in lieu of the run game with your passing game and defense if everybody stays healthy. Coming up next, where were the New Orleans Saints successful and not so successful in the run game in 2022, looking at tons of different parameters. We're going to get to all that and more as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look at how the New Orleans Saints competed in the run game last year based upon where they ran, what types of plays worked for them, and kind of the personnel packages that worked for them as well. Where I want to start here is looking at the sort of run concepts that the Saints use. So I went through and I watched 443 run plays by the New Orleans Saints in 2023. So or 2022. So I'm very jazzed about this, actually. So just so you know, I'm a nerd. So when I looked at all this, basically the New Orleans Saints, and some of these were like plays that were non-plays, no plays, stuff like that. So the Saints surrendered over 30 tackles for a loss in their run games. You can kind of put that a little bit on the offensive line of scrimmage, offensive line of scrimmage, but also a little bit of, dancing around in the backfield and things like that. And one of the things that they also love about Kendre Miller, by the way, the New Orleans Saints, is no wasted time in the backfield. Like, he's very patient and he waits for things to develop. There's a little Le'Veon Bellish there. But when there is the gap, the hole that he has to hit, he's right through it. So something else that the Saints really like about Kendre Miller that I think impacts their ability to maybe lessen some of these tackles for a loss that have been surrendered. They averaged 4.2 yards per rush in 2023. Or 2022. That's respectable. It's not great, but it's respectable. Where they seem to be the most successful was power runs. 4.8-ish, let's call it just over 4.5 yards per carry on those situations. Now, the reason why that's the case, though, is not because of the Alvin Kamara, halfback power runs. It's because you had several breakaway QB power runs. So keep that in mind, that Taysom Hill is just as much a part of this run game as Jamaal Williams and Kendre Miller and any of the other guys back there. So when we highlight the other running backs that are going to be competing for a spot and potentially having an impact in 2023 if Alvin Kamara were to miss games, we won't be ruling out Taysom Hill's involvement in there as well. So we'll get to that, but this is a pretty good illustration. Over 4.5 yards per carry is usually a good identifier of an offense being able to succeed in the run game. But you look at the number of sort of these inside runs versus the outside runs. I clocked about 120 of these being outside zone runs. These are ones that are getting outside the tackle. I clocked around 90 as inside zone, and then about 80 in terms of power runs, which would also be inside the line of scrimmage as well. So if you look at 80 plus 70, I don't know why I got that, 80 plus 70, you look at about 150 runs. So they were running a lot, well, not a lot more, but they were, I don't know, you consider some counter runs and things like that, some man blocking runs. Yeah, I think you could conceivably say and comfortably say that the Saints ran between the tackles more than they ran outside the tackles in terms of concept calls, not literally where the pass ran because sometimes, or where the run went, because sometimes you call a play to run up the middle, but then there's a break in the offensive line and then the running back bounces to the outside and that gets counted as an outside run or a run outside the tackle, but maybe that's not what was called, right? So that's something else to keep in mind. So the Saints found a lot of success in that power run game, didn't find a lot of success in their outside zone game. I clocked them in at barely over 3 yards per carry when it came to that. So that's a place where you want to see the New Orleans Saints get much better, because that's been a spot where Alvin Kamara has been massively successful. Inside zone runs that I found, by the way, pretty successful there. I had them just over 4.5 yards per carry as well. So what we're learning here is that the Saints can find ways to run in between the tackles, but it doesn't always center around Alvin Kamara. It doesn't always center around the running backs. The quarterback in Taysom Hill ends up having a big impact there. Bottom line around the New Orleans Saints run game could have been better in 2022, regardless of concept. Can improve going into 2023, because where they struggled, running in between the tackles, things like that, with the running backs, you'll see running backs that are more efficient in that area of the game. And then when it comes to the outside zone runs, you're going to have a fresh-legged Alvin Kamara doing that, as opposed to one that's been beaten up for 25, 27 carries between the tackles per game. So on the outside to the left, the Saints averaged about 5 yards per carry. Outside to the right, they averaged about 5 yards per carry. Now remember, that includes runs that were called up the middle, but then bounced to the outside, stuff like that. Some breakaways, some kind of like broken run fit calls, things like that. Between the tackles, though, under 4 yards per carry. So not very, just barely over 3.5 from what I saw. So not very successful there. So again, you want to see the inside the tackle efficiency come up, but you want to see the outside the tackle efficiency rely a little bit more away from broken plays, a little bit more away from the Taysom Hill game plan, and a little bit more with the running backs. And I think you can expect to see some of that in 2023 based on personnel alone. Next thing I want to look at is how well they ran in certain personnel groups. In 12 personnel, they were pretty efficient, 53% success rate there, 4.2 yards per rush, not terrible. In 11 personnel, they actually were better in 11 personnel. So now to remind you, 11 personnel means 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers, while 12 personnel is 1 running back, 2 tight ends, 2 wide receivers. And so the thing to keep in mind here is, are the Saints better now at running with 2 tight ends on the field? Does Foster Moreau move the needle there? I think they can be. And then even with an extra offensive lineman on the field, that will clock into some of those numbers as well when they bring out a 6th offensive lineman that clocks in as an eligible tight end or an eligible receiver and stuff like that. So I think what we've learned here is exactly what we expressed at the very beginning, is that the Saints have everything that they need to be able to produce in 2023, especially if the offensive line stays healthy, even if they're without Alvin Kamara, because you're going to get better production on the outside with a refreshed Kendre Miller and or a refreshed Alvin Kamara, and you're going to get good in between the tackles efficiency with Jamaal Williams. You'll see a tick up there. So coming up in tomorrow's episode, what we'll look at is who are the other players that are going to impact the run game for the New Orleans Saints if Alvin Kamara does indeed miss games while we're expecting this multi-game suspension. Will it be guys like Benjamin and Kirk Merritt who can also be receivers, or will they look to some unknown players like Ellis Merriweather? And of course, where does Taysom Hill fit in? And the other thing that we'll take a look at is more specific numbers on where Jamaal Williams was most effective. So we have all of that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode as we continue to take a look at where things can go for the New Orleans Saints when it comes to Alvin Kamara. I know that we mentioned that we were going to do the coverage breakdowns. We will get to that, but I really wanted to focus on everything going on with the Saints when it comes to this piece of the puzzle for them, which includes, of course, Alvin Kamara and that suspension, or not suspension news, but the legal process news. So we'll get to more of this tomorrow, and then we'll circle back around to the coverage statistics. But I want to give you what you want, which is Alvin Kamara talk, running back talk right now, as opposed to just sitting here and rattling off a bunch of numbers and trying to prove to you how smart I am. So we'll have more of that coming up for you in tomorrow's episode. I appreciate you, as always, making Locked On Saints a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.